Hello, and we are live. Welcome to Design WakeUp, the place where twice a month, design, innovation, and management meet. We are your hosts,
Sam
and Marco. That's right, this week we don't have Simon with us. Keep saying that I'm jet-setting when I'm not within the episodes, but this week is the one who's away, sailing across the UK. Before we continue with this week's episode, a topic that is very close to my heart, I wanted to say to the people who's listening to us, don't forget to subscribe. Click the subscribe button, give us a like, tell us what you think. Just say we love the episode in the comments area. We'll take that.
or constructive feedback, but no meanies there, please.
I'm the biased one here in this conversation. Anyways, so this week we are going to talk about a company that probably most of you know. If you don't know about them, then I think you should get out more. It's Airbnb, and we are going to talk about how Airbnb applied design and design thinking to turn a project they had from, I would say, days from bankruptcy into a multi-billion-dollar company that is present all over the world. And I'm going to touch a little bit as well how we think companies in different markets should apply some of the principles of design Airbnb applied in their own businesses to grow and help continue being relevant in their market. I think it's going to be a good one.
I'm very excited.
Me too, man. I love the company, not because of the service that they provide, even though they disrupted an industry dominated by hotels and the likes of Booking.com companies, websites. But it's because of what they did and how they did it. More importantly, how they did it and how they are doing it. If you don't know the story of Airbnb, I think it's of common knowledge, more or less, if you are interested, in the topic or you just keep your ear out, that they were a company that struggled in the beginning. It wasn't an overnight success. And it's interesting how the idea came up. It's the typical design type story. So the initial founders, Brian Chesky and Joe Gabby, they met at university and they were struggling to pay their rent, right? Now they were looking for ideas how to, generate more revenue to help them with the rent. And funny enough, they realized that there was a problem in the market as far as booking hotels. So they had a design conference happening in San Francisco, coming to San Francisco. They were based in San Francisco at the time. And they thought, if it's so difficult to find an hotel room, designers will come to this conference, they'll need to stay somewhere. What if we turn our loft into a bed and breakfast type of accommodation? We would buy a few air mattresses and charge a fee for their stay, and we could generate a few, additional revenue. So that's what they did, right? So they bought. It's so interesting. They bought 3 air mattresses, and they had 3 guests that stayed at their loft and paid $80 for the stay. After the conference, they did a few more stuff because they wanted to make the whole experience exciting for them. People coming to San Francisco probably don't know San Francisco that well. So we're going to make that experience good for you and act as tour guides while you stay. So the whole experience was really, really interesting because they looked at what would I like to have an experience if I was on the other end. So that was interesting. And then they thought maybe there's a business opportunity here. People pay $80 to stay in my apartment. Maybe there's something here that we can explore. So they got in touch with former roommate Nathan. This name is going to be difficult for me to pronounce. Do you know how to pronounce it, Sam? Nathan?
I think it's Bleharczyk. but I'm not sure.
Sam, thank you, Sam, for saving me the embarrassment.
Now I can be embarrassed.
It's always so much easier to throw your friends under the bus.
Thanks, Marco. I'll remember that.
So anyways, they invited Nathan and they tried a couple of approaches. I think the first approach that they tried was to create a room sharing type website, but that was a thing already back in 2008 or 7 when they first started off. And they got back to the original idea of creating a air mattress, air bed, and breakfast type of accommodation. By the way, and just a parenthesis, Airbnb comes from the original name, air bed and breakfast. That's quite interesting. I didn't know this until recently. So they tried a few times. I think they tried 5 different approaches until they managed to crack the formula to start succeeding. Do you want to know what that is?
I do.
Do you want to know what that is, Sam? I'm going to tell you.
Yes, Marco, I do.
They were trying at this point to get some investment. They were presenting to VCs, and one of the times they went to a conference to promote themselves, try to get some awareness. And one of the VCs was the first VC to back him, Paul Abraham, got interested in them and invited them to their accelerator. And I think that was a turning point for them. I think if it wasn't for Paul Abraham, probably Airbnb wouldn't exist today, or they would have more difficulties to have launched the website and the company. So their mindset was, and what changed was the mindset. Listen to this, the mindset. The mindset was what made the company change. So they first recognized there was an opportunity. They were trying to solve a problem that existed in the market related with how difficult it was to find an hotel room. But somewhere along the way, they lost it, and they were thinking about what do we need to create to scale. Do you relate with this, Sam? Whatever we do, whatever the business does, needs to scale, needs to be good for the business. Is this something
that every time? Yeah.
There you go.
Every project.
And Paul was like, wait a second. Stop trying to create things that you think will scale. Just start doing things that won't scale, or that you don't know that will scale. But just go out there and speak with your users. Understand what they want. Try, test, see if it works. And that's when the real things start to develop. And it was through this approach, this culture of, you won't be blamed for trying. You won't be blamed for thinking out of the box. Be creative. See if it works. That they managed to go from a struggling company to one of the most successful companies today. So that's just a summary of Airbnb.
I think it's actually quite interesting. I kind of knew maybe half of it before you told it. So there were quite a few nuggets of information that I gained. Sorry, my cat's just decided to go for a walk. I think it's also important to add that actually Brian and Joe are quite different from other Silicon Valley founders in that they actually went to design school, and they have, famously kind of used their training from that to do this, to reimagine the world of travel, to reimagine the world of travel and kind of hotels and stays. So I think that's very interesting. I think for me, being a designer, I think it's quite inspiring to know that, there are people like me out there that can do amazing things without that kind of business knowledge. And, they had so many iterations of their idea. They were failing, but they were still going. They were still driven, and they were just trying and then empathizing with the user. Suddenly, wow, okay, we're getting somewhere, which is great. It's just a very inspiring story. So great stuff.
No, exactly. It's about that relatability with your users, with the persons that we're trying to engage. And why are we covering Airbnb here today? What's the whole relation with the corporate world? I think it has to do with how businesses sometimes forget why they are doing something. And you are doing something at the end of the day to make the life of your clients better. For whatever reason that is, right? If you look solemnly at the data you have in terms of we have a big customer churn or we are losing customer engagements, we need to think about ways of improving that. And you don't go to your clients, to your users, and try to get a hold of a deeper understanding as to why this is happening and their experience is being probably not what they expected, that is causing to the impact on the metrics that we just talked about. Will you really deliver the best outcome for them when it comes to go back to the level of success in metrics you want to get? And I think that this is the key point of today's of our conversation today. That is, if you don't ultimately develop an understanding of why the problem exists by blending that user understanding and specific aspects that are causing a lower user experience or not originating the outcome metrics that you wanted to originate, which can be, for example, an action of a purchase, chances are you're going to get it wrong or it's going to take you more time. It's going to be inefficient, right? So that's why I love Airbnb so much, is that they took this approach, they used the data that they were receiving, but focus on the user. Always focus on the user to develop, to then apply code to whatever feature solution that they had to develop, test it, iterate it, and see how those changes were to increase the success representing the metrics, right? And I fear that some of the companies, they don't do that very well. I don't know. What do you think, Sam?
Well, I can speak from experience that the user research up front, just like the user testing further down the line, are the two things that get cut out of a project first. So they're the ones that, they try to, if there isn't budget or time or resource, let's just get rid of that. We've got a solution. Let's just go with it. And I've recently been doing some user interviews, and it is one of the best parts of my job is actually talking to users. And I have this thing that I always say, it's, I talk to the users to get them to do the job for me, because they do. They tell me exactly what they want, and all I have to do is then write it up, give it to the client. I'm not really selling myself right now, but basically recently, and I'm not going to say which project this is because I can't, but recently I've been conducting some user interviews about an onboarding experience. And it was so interesting because I got to talk, this is a multinational company, they're all over the world. And so I first started off with speaking to some people in the UK. So they had very similar experiences, the time that they were onboarded was quite similar. They had similar emotions, but there was a difference depending on age, and I'm not going to go into too much detail here. But then a few days later, I had this really lovely talk with a few people outside the UK, some from Europe, some from Asia. And it was drastic how very different their emotions were and the way that they went about it. So they just moaned a lot less, to be honest, than people in the UK. Even though they started at a very similar time, their onboarding went the same amount of time, so around a month. So it was very interesting to see how completely different people's takes were on what they needed, what they required to do their jobs better, to be onboarded quicker into the company, but also what their feelings were about the whole process and what could have been done better. And they literally give me this all on a platter, and all I have to do is do some, design thinking exercises to get the information out of them, and then just a set of recommendations that I give the client. So speaking to your users is a must. I have so many examples of when a project nearly failed because they didn't speak to the users. They brought me in a little bit late, but still brought me in, and it saved the project, and it really did save it. So I'm absolutely on board with this.
That's such a beautiful example. I'm going to tell you more. If CNN, when they tried to release their streaming service, CNN Plus, had brought you on board too, maybe they could have saved millions of dollars. By the way, if you want to understand what we're talking about here, we wrote an article about it related with how design thinking can help create better organizations and people. We'll put you'll find the link in the description if you go to our description. But that's exactly right. I'm always skeptical when people think or say, in order to achieve this objective, here's what you have to do. And giving you the solution up front based on what their own understanding of the solution is or must be. And surprisingly enough, it still happens today, and more often than people think. People go about speaking about, I apply design to things, I use agile, and I'm super innovative and driven, customer driven. But most of the things, it's quite ambiguous when we look at the real life work, and it doesn't happen that way, and they go back to the old ways of doing things, right? I don't know. It's interesting. So what made? Let me touch on that. What made the client bring you on board? So what was the trigger? That's interesting. I'd like to know more about that.
Well, firstly, what I have to say is, if you want to be a designer, you have to learn to sell yourself and your skills. That is a must these days, because as I said, companies very rarely prioritize what we do. I think when I started in the company that I'm working with now, they really believed in human-centered design, but they didn't really understand what it was and why. And they had their 5 kind of buzzwords. So they were like personas, empathy maps, blah, blah. And then they just shouted those words at clients, and they were like, selling it, right? And sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't. When it comes to user interviews, it's such a lovely thing to do, because it not only gives you insight, but it also gets buy-in from the users. So they feel, it's a word of mouth thing. They are then going to go to their colleagues and say, oh, they asked me about this. Did you hear about, they start these conversations. So you suddenly already have super users as soon as you start doing something. So I think when you talk to the clients and, when you get your designers in early on in the process and you enable them to actually sell it and them do the talking and being able to tell the client exactly what a user interview is, what it's used for, how it will, what kind of outcomes it's going to give, how it's going to support the project, suddenly they're like, oh my God, this is amazing. And, if a few case studies here and there might help, but I think with me in this company that I'm in right now, it was one project where, I can't go into too much detail, but it was a project where we came up with a solution very early on. And if we only focused on that one piece that the client wanted us to focus on, it was the right solution. Absolutely. But then one of my colleagues who was working on the project, he invited me and he said, listen, I've got a feeling. Can you just go in and just talk to a few people? I spoke to maybe 8 people, half an hour each, no problem, like literally in a day, all done. And oh my Lord, when I started to speak to them and not only focus on that little slither in the whole big gigantic process that they have to work in, suddenly these little things started to come out. They were actually gigantic. That if we had implemented that solution, it could have basically destroyed the process. I'm not going to go into too much detail, but it would have been a very severe thing that would have happened, and they would have had a really, really big problem with reverting back to what was before. In the end, we came up with this solution where we kind of created this front end that they thought that was the solution, but actually in the back end, it was very similar to what was going on now. It was a very good interim solution, still working, clients still happy, but it just shows that if I hadn't come in and just spoken to those few people, the outcome could have been so much different. So yeah, speak to your users, speak to your employees, speak to your people. It's very important.
So in summary, what we're basically saying is, if you want to create a value proposition, there are three things that need to happen, right? First one is understand your users. What they're trying to do, what they're trying to achieve, what's happening today that's keeping them from achieving their goal, and having perhaps a poor experience. Then linking that to a systems thinking that will accompany that journey, right? So it doesn't start in, oh, I want to buy something, I'll go to checkout. There's a whole process that follows through that journey until the moment of checkout, but doesn't even stop at checkout. What happens next? So you need to understand that and create the systems thinking that supports you delivering a better outcome to the user, and then support that with technology. If you nail these three things, but start with the user, you are more than 50% there to get you to a better place than you were before. Which kind of brings me back to the original topic of Airbnb, that they use this, design type principles to test their ideas and see what works and what not. And one might say or suggest, yes, that's really good and beautiful, but they were a startup company, so they could try different approaches and see what worked best and what didn't. I still have a strategy and a vision and something that I want to get there, right? My answer to that is, for you to really grow, because at the end of the day, that's what you want to go. What you do, you want to grow. And to grow, you need to know 4 important things. You need to acquire clients, you need to retain ones that you already have, you need to monetize what's happening and defend from competition, right? You still need to know 3 components, which is strategy. An idea needs to be aligned with your strategy and understanding of your organization's mission and growth model. Needs to go and feed into the customer problem. What is the thing that they are going through that is keeping them from having a good experience or helping you get to the outcome you want to get? And then it's also the business outcome. That is, what are the things, what are the metrics that you want to focus on for growth? So, and then you can start ideating using the same design principles, but follow a different, perhaps, type of prioritization approach of the ideas that you want to test, that can be feed into existing products and can be represented in new features, or maybe like a new thing that you want to bring to market, right? But the principle is the same. Design, focus on the clients, understand what the problem that they are going through, instead of, and then iterate, then enable this culture and environments to allow creativity and allow people to fail. That's, I think, still one of the biggest problems in companies, that is the barriers that exist to creativity and allow people to have a voice.
Absolutely. And I actually think, Marco, that that's a very good ending to our episode.
It is, I think, isn't it, Sam?
I really do. So what do you think? Shall we give our socials so that people can start liking and having a look at goodie bags and other stuff that we post?
I think it's a good idea. Over to you.
Well, you can go to Instagram, design.wakeup. We're also on Twitter, design_wakeup. We do have a website, designwakeup.com, where you can read some of the blogs and listen to the podcast. I think we've got a LinkedIn. Is that right, Marco?
We do have a LinkedIn. You can find us there, Design Wake Up.
And on YouTube as well, where you'll be able to see our lovely faces while we talk at you.
And again, don't forget to like and subscribe. Let us know what you think. Was this topic interesting to you? Does it help you to understand what can make a product better, and why I think Airbnb example is such a good example of how and why design thinking should be applied in all organizations at all levels? Or do you still have some doubts about it? Let us know in the comments.
Thanks, Marco.
Thank you, Sam. Well, I'll see you guys next week, and where we'll talk about the Black Mirror case.